name is Jack McLean. I'm your host, and today my guest is Scott Dickinson. Scott has worked in multiple Olympic sports as well as being part of 2 different football codes. His career spanning over 20 years saw him work with the Queensland Academy of Sport, where he helped coach many different kinds, such as hockey, baseball, before moving into the Newcastle Knights organisation. Since returning back to Australia, Scott has worked at both the North Melbourne Football Club in the AFL and the Victorian Institute of Sport before taking up his current role as National Strength and Conditioning Lead with Swimming Australia. His topic today will be discussing the difference between working in pro sport and Olympic sports from a strength and conditioning perspective. Before we start this episode, our mission here at Prepare Like a Pro is to empower aspiring athletes and staff with practical knowledge from some of the industry's most inspiring individuals and to strengthen the AFL community. If you like the show, please show your support by following us on Instagram and subscribing to the podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube. Welcome, Scott. Thanks for jumping on, mate.
Pleasure, Jack. Yeah, good to be here.
Well, we're back to where I first met you at ASCA Level 3 on Zoom.
It's a lot of video conferences. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, a bit of a hangover from that. So no, it's good to see you.
And I'll start with a pump up. I could tell even in a Zoom format, the respect you had in the Zoom world or virtual room, we'll call it, straight away from not only the coaches that were on, which was some great guests, but also the coaches running the ASCA level accreditation. So really looking forward to this chat, mate, and the athletes and coaches tuning in, make sure to get the notepad out, as I reckon there'll be gems all the way through. But take us through the very beginning of your career, mate. What age did you discover you had a passion for working with elite athletes and strength and conditioning?
Oh, yeah. Look, I always loved working in sport. So ever since high school, I knew that I wanted to be involved in sport in any way, one way, shape or form. So I suppose, through that sort of high school period where you get to try different things out, work experience, I sort of did, tried physiotherapy and a few other bits and pieces and weren't quite for me. But it did sort of lead me down that pathway. So I went to uni and did sports science there. And through that process, in that sort of final year practicum, I was really fortunate to be able to do my practicum at the Queensland Academy of Sport in the physiology department there. And whilst I found the physiology side of things a little bit dry, I did get the chance to sort of have a look in to see what the strength and conditioning department was doing during that block. And I was also playing some pretty decent level baseball at the time. So the gentleman that was running the S&C department at the QAS was also the S&C coach for the Brisbane Bandits at the time. Lachlan Penfold, who's now gone great guns since then. He's now at Melbourne Storm, and I think Lockie was probably the first coach who got me inspired to say, actually, I really love what that guy does. I want to be like him. So then when I had the chance to then do my prac at the QAS, and I kept sort of looking into the gym and the S&C department to see what was going on. That's kind of what drew me in there. And, I got the fortune to start with the baseball squad at that stage. And then, one squad went to 2, went to 3 and 4. And before I knew it, I really had to come to the point where I had to make a decision whether I was going to jump from my full-time role, which I was working with Baseball Queensland doing development clinics at that stage. So loved coaching, all of that sort of stuff was still there. And whether I wanted to stay there or whether I wanted to jump ship and like just take the leap. And that was probably the thing that, it was scary at the time, but taking the leap, taking the chance, actually encouraged my then boss, who was Kelvin Giles at that stage. He sort of recognised the same sort of qualities I think he saw in himself at a younger age. Someone willing to take a risk on themselves and commit to it. And so before I knew it, I had a full-time job, and that was it. So I've been doing S&C or parts of it ever since. It's been a really good journey.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing. That's a great insight. And Good segue probably for the next part. You've mentioned two pioneers in the industry, Lachlan Folden and Kelvin Giles. Who are some, and maybe you want to elaborate on those two guys, or were there maybe some others, but were there some strong influences when you look back to this phase of your career that helped mentor you, if you like?
Yeah, well, look, Lockie, as I said, he was probably my inspiration to get into the field. And has been has been a mate ever since. I've been able to see someone I can go and have a chat to, and he's been very giving of his time over the years, and I've really appreciated his input. Kelvin has been as much a father figure at times as a mentor. He's, if you talk to others that he's come into contact with and worked with over the years, he really cares about the progression of the person rather than the job or the industry and that sort of. So he really cares about the individual. So seeing him work and having someone like him to bounce ideas off, and as you said, he's one of the pioneers of the game. So just phenomenal person to have in your corner. And then, as I was working at the QAS, I was fortunate enough to work alongside Suki Hobson at the time, who's now currently with the Bucks. Just an absolutely brilliant practitioner, just first class. And, again, attention to detail, enthusiasm, personality. She brings it all. And I try to learn a lot off her from that side of things. Like the way that she engages with people is just first class. So, then over the years, there's been a bunch of other people like Tim Pillow at the USOC. And when I went to the Netherlands, people like Christian Boss and Robert Walsh, and, just general coaches like, when I was at the QAS, the men's hockey coach there, Greg Browning, was just a wealth of information. And just see the way that he engaged with his players was awesome. Michael Bowl, who I currently work with, one of the best people managers I've ever seen, and Jacco Verharen at the Dutch Swimming Federation. He was phenomenal as well. He was also out here as the Australian swimming head coach for a while. There's been a bunch, mate. Like from coaches to admin people. I've probably tried to find mentors and leaders in different aspects of my career rather than sort of just in the coaching area. I've tried to have a broader network of mentors and people that I can go and talk to, because it's, as you know, it's like the job is more than just one part. There are so many aspects to it. I find that, different individuals have different strengths that they can bring to the table. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Well said, mate. And from a, looking back in terms of starting out as a strength and conditioning coach, and something that we'll go into a little bit later on is the difference between pro sports and Olympic sports. But if you were to start your career again, do you think there's a preference for developing S&Cs to start in Olympic sports? Like obviously the QAS and Australian Institute of Sport at that time was pretty impeccable in terms of the practitioners that have come from it over the last couple of decades, but as well as, of course, pro sports. But do you think there's a preference on either side, or is it just going with your gut and what you're most passionate about to start with and see where that leads you?
Oh, look, I probably don't want to comment on any one person's individual journeys because everyone gets into it in different ways, right? So I don't think that there's any one right way to do it. But I do think as your career progresses, it's important to get a well-rounded education across many sports. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. I'd rather have a career of 20 years having 5 or 6 different experiences in different places and being able to build upon those experiences every step of the way, than just be pigeonholed into one sport or one club and that sort of thing. I think you can tend to, like, number one, you can be pigeonholed, but secondly, you can tend to just put your own blinkers on if you sort of have the same experience. So I would definitely encourage any young coaches as they come through to, however you get into the industry, doesn't matter. But as you start to think about developing your career, my advice would be to try and seek out those different, opportunities that either pro sport or Olympic sport might be able to offer you, because they both offer very different things, and each experience is just as valuable. I wouldn't say that one is better than the other. They're just different.
Yeah. And it's probably one of the strongest perks of our field is, we're not stuck to like a technical coach. Obviously, you're in one sport. But
absolutely.
Yeah, S&Cs, we can move all around the world and throughout all different experiences. Do you mind elaborating into a little bit more detail with your experience in working in all these different environments? How does it actually help you almost make a bigger impact in, let's just say, the sport that you're currently in? For example, if someone's thinking, if I want to be the best S&C for cricketers, it would make sense to specialize in that. But do you want to allude on how some of the benefits of being in different environments and being around different practitioners during your development phase, and how that can help you be the best you can be?
Yeah, absolutely. There's like take the example that you just provided, with cricket. If I was to look at, employing an elite level strength and conditioning coach for cricket, I don't think I personally would be just looking for someone who's only ever done cricket. I'd be looking for someone who's had experience in other sports that might be able to bring those, that knowledge, that expertise back to the table, that maybe can shed a different light, have a slightly different way of looking at things. I'd probably look for people that have strong expertise in shoulder, rehab or shoulder health, so any sort of throwing or overhead hitting sports, that sort of stuff. So tennis, baseball, water polo, all of those sorts of things, even swimming, for example, where shoulder health is so important. And I'd be looking for things, for sports in which people understand how to develop power as well, that rotational strength and if you look at fast bowlers and back health, that's an issue there as well. So, when you look at some of those other sports and the way they treat their athletes and the way they build load and the way they, I suppose, explore the entire athletic journey, it's very easy just to have your blinkers on if you're only ever in one sport. So if you can bring your expertise from another sport and go, actually, I've done this a slightly different way, but I can see how I might be able to apply the same principles in cricket and come up with a really fantastic result. So it just expands your toolkit, that you're working with. I think that's probably the best way of saying it. So rather than just having, every time you're just using a hammer, then everything becomes a nail, right? So, if you've got a really broad toolkit, you've got a really broad set of skills that you can use to solve the vast array of problems that come up. So, and given that every athlete is individual, if something doesn't work for one athlete, then you've got to figure out, well, what am I going to do next? And if that doesn't work, what's my next protocol? So that's where that varied experience comes in, I think.
Yeah. So you can really problem solve and bring more experiences to the table.
100%.
Working in individual, but also as a team.
Yeah.
That's great, mate, and definitely been probably one of the strongest themes of throughout the podcast is the ability for people to be adaptable and work across different sports. So it's definitely a clue from success leaves clues, and it seems to be one that keeps popping up. But going back onto that topic, you've worked in a range of different sports. What would you say from a development point of view would be like if looking back when you were starting your career, would be some of your favorite ways to make the most of a mentor or someone that you're working with that has been in that sport for a long time? What would be some of your favorite ways to build a relationship with them, but then also be able to apply the knowledge that you're learning?
Yeah, look, I think, if I look back at the people that I've worked with over time, it's just, in terms of building the relationship, it's really just being interested in them as a person. You know, what makes them tick, and trying to understand their journey. You know, so I found when, if I talk about Kelvin, for example, I used to love having him in the gym. When he'd come around and he'd see what you were doing, and he might chip in and have a different way of coaching an athlete to get the outcome that you were looking for. And he'd sit there, or he'd walk around with you and share some of those stories, and then all of a sudden, the guy, honestly, he could talk for 5 hours straight without taking a breath, I reckon. But he's one of those people that, when they do that, you're hanging on every word, every step of the way anyway. So just waiting for that little knowledge bomb to drop, that little pearl of wisdom to come out of his mouth, and there's plenty of them when he talks. So so that, I suppose that's what I love with those guys, and the other people that I was working with through the QAS and through those formative years for me, it was working alongside them. And then you get in and you'd start doing project work together, and you'd brainstorm things, and just start to work collaboratively and try to explore different options. So that was, honestly, that was some of the most beneficial and rewarding times in my career, that early phase, because you're still trying to explore for yourself, where your vision and your philosophy lies, and being open to all of those different experiences that other people bring in, I think is essential for any coach, let alone strength and conditioning coach, as they're developing. So so just being open and paying attention to the things that make them tick, just all of those sorts of things, and spending time together. The whole thing with group dynamics, there's a critical number of hours that it takes for people to form those close bonds. And if I look at my journey over the years and how we've moved around from place to place, I see it myself in terms of how, myself and my kids and my wife have all, you form different social circles everywhere you go, but it takes time, and you have to go through stuff to get there. It's not just the easy sailing stuff that gets you there. It's the tough times as well, and that's part of it. Making sure you have each other's back, every step of the way, and you're there to help and assist. That helps, in my opinion, to form some of those bonds that you want to form. Yeah.
And when you're talking about the importance of exposing yourself into different environments, what would be some things that you would help with your decision making when it's time to make a change? Whether it be, is it just purely opportunity? You see that there's opportunity outside of your environment that is a bigger role, or is it more once you start feeling comfortable in an environment, is it time to shake it up when you are in that development phase? Take us through, I guess, the decision making that an S&C should make when they know, okay, now's the time I need to start exploring other opportunities or other roles.
Yeah, so I think if I look at that, the first block when I was at the QAS the first time, I wasn't itching to get out of there at the time, but I'd spent about 7 years in that environment, and we'd had a couple of opportunities come up along the way. So Suki and I, we worked together on an ACL rehab project that we'd sort of been inspired by Bill Knowles and his work and all of that sort of thing as well. And the opportunity came up to work with some professional sport athletes during that time. So I suppose that for me, that kind of lit that fire to go, I'd really kind of like to give this a crack. Just working with a different set of athletes, challenging myself to get out of my comfort zone again. So, you mentioned, is it when you start to feel really comfortable? Sometimes it is. But, if I look back at that phase, I loved working there. I loved the people that I was working with. It was just, let's think about what's next. Let's have an adventure and try something new.
That leap of faith is coming back up.
Leap of faith.
Start. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that's, if you're in a great environment, that was my gauge. It was just like, yeah, there's an opportunity, and I kind of want to scratch it. So let's at least have a look and see what the opportunities are. And if I look at other places, that some have been really brilliant experiences, others have been not wonderful experiences, and there's different cues that you have to listen to along the way. If you find yourself searching for the jobs and wondering what else is out there, I reckon that's a pretty good indication that maybe you need to start giving that voice a little bit more attention. If you're not happy, if you're spending more time at work than you are, investing in yourself and your family, and you're starting to get resentful, there's so many different cues that are probably dependent on the environment that you're in. But so I suppose for me, that in that first instance when I was developing, that was the key. It was just like, I've got a little itch. I'm not ready to jump. I don't want to run, but let's explore. Let's see what else is out there.
Yeah. And going into the staff departments, how does an Olympic department differ to a professional sport in terms of your high performance departments?
Oh, look, if you think about pro sport, it's a little microcosm. It is a very small, focused, concentrated environment where you're working with each other day in, day out, and it's a singular focus, it's a singular purpose. The day-to-day results matter. So every week you have that test. Every week your feet are held to the flames again, and you come away with a result, and that immediate feedback was what we did this week good enough or not. So if you look at that sort of environment, it can be a little bit more volatile. It can be a little bit more stressful and reactive to what's going on around it. Whereas if you look at Olympic sports, and probably in pro sports, these days it's a bit different. But certainly when we're starting out, back in 2005-06, when I started at the Knights, we had a very, very small staff. So you had to be across everything. You had to be a generalist, and spread yourself across different aspects. Whereas these days, you've got, I suppose, a lot more specialists that are employed by clubs. So I would say that clubland these days has a lot more benefits than compared to what it ever used to. So that's a great thing. But whereas you look to the Olympic sports, and you have different staff members working across different programs a lot of the time, and that might be within the same sport, or it might be across different sports. One of our S&C guys at the moment in the Gold Coast hub, he's working across triathlon. He's doing some race walking stuff, and he's working with swimming. So that's, for him, that's a good bit of variation there. If you look at the new position that's being advertised in the Brisbane hub, that's some field and court sports as well as swimming. So that, and if you look at the other practitioners that are in there, they might be working with squash or rowing or whatever it is. So when you come back to that earlier point we made about that diversity of thought coming into a central think tank, that's where I find that the Olympic sports, or the Olympic network, has some distinct advantages for being able to draw on each of those experiences. But on the flip side, it's very much a quieter build-up. It's a slow burn. It's 4 years. Yes, you've got world championships every year, every second year, and Con Games every second year. But everybody knows that the focal point is the Olympic Games. That's what we're working towards. That's what our funding's based on. That's what our athletes, are judged upon. Olympic success. There's no higher honour than being a Olympic gold medalist. So that process of how it plays out, it's very much a slow burn, and the pressure to achieve results on a weekly basis is nowhere near as great. So I would say, if anything, sometimes it can lack that urgency to achieve, to get things done, because people know that they've got time.
Yeah.
Whereas pro sport, it can be. It has its own dangers. So, on one hand, you've got the reactiveness or the reactivity of pro sport, jumping at things that may not actually be important, sometimes. And on the other hand, you've got the tendency sometimes to work a little bit too slowly, to be a little bit too relaxed. But at the end of the day, I think it all comes down to the head coach and their philosophy and their, I suppose, how they drive their staff. So everything's sort of based off the head coach, and that doesn't matter whether it's Olympic or team sport. So, yeah.
And you mentioned the S&C that's working across 3 different sporting athletes in terms of population. Well, if they're at the QS for that period of time for the 4-year cycle or 3-year cycle this Olympic cycle, will they stay with that group of athletes all the way through, or is it, obviously if there's change in the department with people getting different jobs, so forth, It makes sense there's change, but they shuffle the cards. But is that the sort of plan, to have stability all the way through, or to keep things interesting, because it is like a slow burn, like you mentioned, from the staff as well as athletes' perspective, you change the voice amongst the team?
Yeah, look, I think most of the time we like to try to keep it based on an Olympic cycle.
Yep.
So you have that continuity all the way through. If you look at an Olympic cycle in years 1 and 2, you can really try a lot of different stuff. Year 1 tends to be a bit of a rebuild, from my perspective. So you have that rebuild phase, that that opportunity for the athletes to deload, recover, regenerate, and get enthusiastic again about the process. Take a little breath, because it's a long cycle to maintain that intensity for without the major competition.
That's an interesting one. So is that where you throw in more games and different bit and just variation in terms of training, or like what would that
absolutely
look like?
Definitely variation. Absolutely. You might have something that you had thought about trying in the years leading up to an Olympic Games, but because of the timeframes that you're talking about and the timeframe that requires to create appropriate change, you might not go there. You don't want to try too many new things coming into the last 12 months before a Games. What you're doing is just tweaking and refining and fine tuning, that sort of stuff. So that first year after the Games, that's a perfect opportunity to then try a few new different things, expose them to a variety of exercises or activities or games or whatever it might be. The second year tends to be a bit more of a build. Second and third year, more of a build, and you are refining what you're doing each step of the way, experimenting with things. Year 3, you probably do a little bit less experimentation, but that's really your last opportunity, at least as far as I see it, your last opportunity to try anything drastic. Because once you get into that last 12 months before the Games, as I said, you don't want to be trying too many new things. You don't want to be exposing the athletes to unfamiliar things that have unexpected outcomes. You want to be able to predict how they're going to react to the training stimulus, with not certainty, but with a pretty high confidence, so that you know what you're going to get at the end of the day. That's the way I've always approached it, mate.
Thanks for breaking that down. And while you're going through that phase with an athlete, talk us through the balance between the art and the science in terms of objective measures to tapping into the athlete on how did you find that block? We played around with different conditioning format. What did you think? And the subjective side.
Yeah, I'll stick my hand up. I'm definitely more on the art side. Whilst I would definitely use some of those objective measures, and we definitely use testing over the last 25 years, the different tests that we've used over that time. we've always had some consistent measurement points throughout the year, and we've definitely trialed, some of the new technology, and we've velocity-based training, or some of the force measurement devices that are out there at the moment, that whether it's force plates or jump mats or whatever it might be. But I've always used them as either a conversation starter or to provide context and information around which we then have a conversation, with the athlete and with the coach. I've never been one to go, well, hang on, we've hit this number, then that's either good enough, or we need to make this intervention, or this isn't good enough, because there's so much more going on with athletes these days. If you're going to base your decisions on one number that an athlete provides, then I think you're cutting yourself off to the rest of the picture that's happening. So
because it become a target, wouldn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So and athletes are smart, mate. They're smart. They know what you're looking for. So I'll share an anecdote with you. When I started at the Knights, we were using some of the jump mat technology and the reactive strain index to look at recovery and figure out how far off their best, or how far off their pre-game measures they were. And we started to try to look for ways to manage their training to optimize their recovery coming out of the back end of games. And athletes are smart. Like, as soon as you started to do that, they're like, oh, I want to chop out today. So I'm not going to put everything in. And as soon as we were starting to use it to look at preparedness to play as well. But as soon as athletes found or felt like that information might be used against them at the selection table, it was a big block. So, we did, whilst we tried it a couple of times, and we actually started a bit of a study on it, and I felt that it was starting to return some interesting data. Just that feeling from the athletes, that lack of trust that, that information was going to be held against them, at some point. And, to be honest, I don't ever think that, we should be using that sort of stuff to rule players in or out. Either, but there was a fear factor from them that's what it was going to be able to do. So, I'd much rather just have that chat with the guys and have that honest feedback and the opportunity to, I suppose, talk through the solution, rather than just say, okay, here's a number. That's what we're basing it on.
Yeah. And going back in the topic again, you mentioned how pro sports, you can be reactive, and then in Olympic cycles, there's a tendency potentially to not have that urgency. Like when you're in either experience, how do you manage the two? Well, so if you're in the pro sport, how do you manage sort of that reactive, potentially the environment that's reactive, and then if you're in Olympic sport, maybe getting complacent potentially? Yeah,
look, to be honest, I think it all comes down to communication, right? So, if you've got clear, well thought out plans and well discussed intervention strategies and all of those sorts of things, and if you've got a calm head at the helm, you can avoid both of those scenarios taking place. In professional sport, I suppose the demands come from a variety of different places. It can be the fans, it can be the board, it can be the players themselves and their families, it can be the media. There's a whole bunch of different places, and they're right under the spotlight every week. So it takes, in my opinion, calm, consistent, clear leadership, from the people who are running the club, and that filters down. It filters down. So, if you look at it from Olympic sport, you still have all those same pressures, but it's just that the blowtorch is only turned up once every 4 years. So as you lead into the World Championships, or if you lead into the Olympic Games, all of a sudden you start to see stories, about the athletes, and now it's their love lives, and now it's this athlete has been seen out at this place, and so that happens, but Olympic athletes get to fly under the radar, I think, a lot of the time compared to pro sport athletes. Yeah. So, but again, it's coaches just got to kind of drive it and stay cool and calm and make sure everyone's working in the same direction.
Yeah. And purely from like an athletic sort of performance point of view, like over a 4-year phase, if you compare to a pro sport athlete, obviously it's a bit different with how they're testing themselves, but, and then to an Olympic athlete, like what do you think is a better conducive environment for development as the whole being?
Look, from a development perspective, I think that the Olympic sport environment,
so less stress and expectation
less stress
from a daily basis.
Yeah, correct. It's less insular. I feel that there's more opportunities to be able to get out there and have different friendship groups and all of that sort of stuff. Whereas in that team sport environment, it's a lot more tribal. It's a lot more, you're hanging out with each other day in, day out. You're away together. All of those. You're eating, sleeping. If you go away, you're sharing a room with. Yeah, that's right. So, look. So from a development point of view, from a personal development point of view, I think probably that Olympic sport environment probably does give those opportunities, because most of our Olympic athletes also have to work for a living outside of performing their sport, and work full-time jobs for a lot of them. So,
and that'll be for the full 4 years, or just the first 3 sort of thing. Yep.
Potentially, or for some it'll be the 3 years leading in, and then it depends on their sport. So how their sport is structured, where they have their build up and all of that sort of stuff. But so it's an interesting difference between the two.
Yeah, and if the Olympic, I'm sure there would be the ones that go full time. Does it take a couple of years to get used to that, by doing it for such a going from having a life outside of the sport to now it's their full identity?
Yeah. Look, you probably see it more on the back end of their career, and I would say that's the same for most athletes that I've come across over the years. Is they spend so long doing something that they're really good at that for a lot of them they can tend to become defined by that, by their sport, by their performance. And I know that there's a lot of really brilliant work that's taking place these days in both pro sport and Olympic sport to try to provide athletes with that set of skills that will help them once they transition out of the sport, to provide them opportunities to explore different things while they're playing and all of that sort of thing, to become much more well-rounded individuals and have a diverse range of interests. So I think we're getting a lot better at that, both within Olympic sport and in team sports these days, which it's essential, as you come out the back end of the sport, that you have something that you can then channel that focus and attention into, so that all of the issues around mental health and depression, all of that sort of stuff these days. It's super important that those things are in place to help athletes as they work out the back end. And
going back to the departments, like how would a pro sport, let's say you've got your sports psychologist, your dietitian, a couple of physios, and then a couple of strength and conditioning coaches, including the high performance manager. How would that look for an Olympic sport? What would be a typical day in terms of the amount of staff that you're connected with throughout the day, whether it be remote as well across the country, as well as face to face?
Yeah, again, it depends on the program. So if I reflect on our structure at the moment, so I'm currently the Gold Coast Swimming Hub manager with the QAS. So our staff at the moment, we have 2 strength and conditioning coaches. One is full-time and one is part-time with swimming. We have 2 physiotherapists. We have sports psych. We have a dietitian. We have a couple of sports scientists that are more movement science, biomechanists sort of base.
Oh, yeah.
And we have a physiologist on board as well. And we've also got our doc. So if I look at our week, we tend to have the most activity and the most interaction at the hub on a Monday and a Thursday. And that's because, the way training is set up during the week, the way that we've decided we want to operate as a hub and make sure that we stay across things and set the week up to function well. We have our staff meeting there. We have physiotherapy treatments taking place there. And we have our doctor coming into the hub on a Monday. And it's just to make sure that we sort of have the best overview or the best opportunity to capture what's happening for everyone on that day. And then that will then filter through the rest of the week. And our Thursday session, fairly similar, but we don't have the doc in on that day. We don't have a couple of the other staff in because they're with other programs. But Thursday is another chance just to have a quick check-in. How are things going? What do we need to keep focusing on? Do we need to put more attention into this athlete, or make an appointment here, or what is it that we need to do? So that Monday, Thursday for us provides a pretty good check and balance. And the other days through the week, our staff are working with other programs across the Gold Coast. So they may not all be together on those days, but the Monday, Thursday provides that opportunity. So whereas in pro sport, as you know, you're pretty much with each other every day.
Yeah.
So you've got that small core staff together every single day. A lot more opportunities to catch up, talk through things, work problems out, all of that sort of stuff. So that's I suppose that's where the difference is for us.
Yeah. And would there be a daily communication, whether it be through like a WhatsApp sort of messenger, or is that not required? The Monday, Thursday, in that face-to-face covers all the communication that needs to be done for the week.
Yeah, we have 1,000 WhatsApp groups. Right. So we have different WhatsApp groups for different squads that we're working with. So obviously, in Olympic sport, even though we're trying to help Australia win gold medals at the Olympics, and our performance staff are working for the QAS. They're also working for individual programs and athletes who are competing against each other. Yeah. So there's a certain level of professionalism that's required in this space to make sure that, number one, you're still able to bring ideas to the table and still able to facilitate different learnings and to, upskill yourself and use that knowledge to help athletes that you might be working with on a day-to-day basis. But at the same time, you've got to be really conscious of the fact that when you're let into that program, when you're privileged enough to be able to work with those coaches and athletes, you also have the responsibility to protect their own individual IP and their training sets and what they're doing, and make sure that you're not providing information that can be then used, for other programs to work from. So it's a really fine balance, which I'm really proud of our staff, the way that they do a great job with that. But that's not to say that it's happened the right way every single time either. So, in the past, there's been other instances where people have felt that, may have shared information too freely or whatever. So, we have to be very aware of that, have to be very conscious of the impact that has on the trust and the relationship that we're building up with those programs and athletes.
Yep. And then in a similar note, what about rehabilitation? Like at a pro sport, there might be one person that solely sort of looks after rehab no matter what athlete gets injured. Or how does it work in your department? Do you have certain athletes, and if your athlete gets injured, you look after them till they return to their performance, or is it done amongst the team?
Yeah, no, pretty much. It's that collaborative approach between the physio and S&C and the coach, and we'll then start, depending on what's happening from a rehab perspective, we'll then start to include the movement scientists and physiologists in with that rehab trajectory as well. To get their input to make sure that the athletes are coming back in a state where they're able to complete full training and get back out to competition as fast as possible. But it's not that you would then hand an athlete over to the rehab coach who then takes care of that for the next 4 to 6 weeks or whatever it might be. And then there's a gradual, phased return to training. It's pretty much, if you're the S&C coach with that program and that's the athlete that you're working with, you see it from, start to finish and when they're healthy and when they're injured.
Yep. And going back to your career, mate, what's some highlights that spring to mind that you're proud of and think back fondly?
Mate, I tend to look back on the experiences rather than, and look, to be honest, the experiences are linked with some of the highlights and special moments. I suppose the first one that springs to mind is the Kookaburras gold medal in Athens. When we had about 9 members on the team, and that was the first time that they'd won the gold medal in donkey's years. But I was still working with the QAS at that stage. So at that point, it was like, we would get the athletes prepared and then we'd release them to the national team and they'd go away. But, I sort of look at that moment, and I remember I was sort of sitting on the couch at 3 a.m. with my newborn daughter on my chest, trying not to scream at the TV. But that memory for me is just burnt into my mind and will be forever. If I think about moving into pro sport, we had a semi-final victory over Manly in 2006 when I was at the Knights, and the noise coming from the crowd as the chant for the team, for Newcastle went up, and the players looking at each other just going, oh my God, what's happening here? The sound and the passion and the emotion that was coming through was unbelievable. Never mind that we went and got towed up the very next week by Brisbane, who went on to win it. But that moment was it was incredible to share. And then, you look at the Olympic Games and being able to go to the Games for the first time and support athletes that I was working with and watching them compete and win and achieve a lifetime dream. And to be there in that moment and share it with them was incredible. To put on the Australian tracksuit for the first time in Tokyo, and to be there when Emma McKeon was setting records, and when Emily Seebohm had just come back from winning bronze medal, and she was so emotional, and to be able to give her a massive hug for the enormous effort that she'd put in over the past 3-4 years, and for that moment, for it all to come back, just sharing that time with the athletes that you work so hard with to help them achieve their goals. It's sometimes it's just brilliant just to be there in the moment and share it with them and just see the look on their faces as it all comes true for them. So is it something
that you've appreciated throughout your whole career, or is it something that you recognize later on to really make sure to relish those moments?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think the latter. You sort of look back, like sometimes you'll find yourselves in those moments and you go, wow, what's happening here? But it's not until later that the significance of it really drops on you. So it's there's an element to I suppose the effort and the performance and everything coming together in a moment that just makes it so special that sometimes it just takes a little while for it just to sink in and for it to take shape, I suppose. So
it's amazing to hear. You can see Yeah, you're almost reliving those moments as you were sharing them.
I am.
Yeah, that's good.
I can see
Visualising
each
them.
of them just as clearly in
Yeah,
my mind, mate. Yeah.
yeah, that's great. What about on the flip side?
Yeah.
Challenges over your career. What are some challenges you've faced, and
Yeah.
what have you learnt from it? From how have you grown from it? I guess.
Yeah, I think again, probably, if I look back at the Rio Olympics, that for me was a really challenging period. So I suppose it's pretty well documented how troubled the Olympics were over there, and how many issues that kept coming up. But I suppose I went over there with an expectation to run our performance centre that was there on site, and just to help the athletes in that last push to finish off their preparations and that sort of thing. And we walked into the village for the first time and went and checked out our rooms and all of that sort of thing. We came back down and we're all looking at each other in a state of shock, because the number of defects that were in our bedroom, like mold on the walls, ceilings that had caved in, toilets that were overflowing with excrement, and you don't even want to think about it. Wires hanging from the ceiling. It was incredibly confronting. So that process and the ability to adapt and shift within a 24-hour period, my job no longer was helping athletes to finish off their preparation. I had to shift into more of a building manager and a problem solver, to try to make sure that as our athletes came into the village, and they came in a staged manner, so they weren't all in on day one, but as they came in, when they went into their rooms, they weren't faced with those issues. And the little issues that kept popping up throughout the entire games, like we had sliding glass doors blowing in because they hadn't been screwed in properly.
Oh my God.
So my job there became, okay, put aside what you thought was going to happen, and now you're doing this.
Yeah.
And it was so incredibly unrewarding for the 5 weeks that I was there. I literally walked out of that games not ever wanting to go to another Olympics. And it actually wasn't until the day that the team was leaving where I actually felt, oh, hang on, this has all been worth it. So the entire women's hockey team just came up, and each one of them in turn, massive hug and a big thank you. And, we appreciate everything you've done for us. So in that moment, it was like, okay, I've done my job. They haven't noticed all of these other bits and pieces, or they haven't had anything that's interfered with their ability to compete. So I've done my job.
Yeah.
And that's probably the biggest thing that I sort of took home is, if you're in that environment, you've got to be willing to do what it takes to facilitate the team's performance or the individual's performance. We're there to support, and we're not supposed to be in front of the camera. We're not front and center. We're behind the scenes. We're there to do our job, and our job is to make sure that they can perform. So it's removing obstacles sometimes, and that was the biggest takeaway that I took from that. I suppose the other one, mate, was losing my job. That's being out of work, and you do a lot of soul searching. You do a lot of questioning. You question yourself, your coaching ability, your knowledge, pretty much everything. So, and then you get put in a situation where you think, oh, how am I going to actually support my family? What's next? And depending on, like, it's more common than not in the industry. So, so it's something for everyone to understand, that it can and probably will happen to you at some point. But you realize just how replaceable you are, right? You also realize who your friends are and who are just your colleagues. You know who's got your back and who doesn't. And some people are incredibly fortunate that they come out of a role and there's plenty of jobs available, and they can pick up a job fairly quickly. Other people, depending on the timing of it, if that merry-go-round has started up again and you haven't got yourself a seat, and you can be like, I've been out of work for 6 months, and that was incredibly difficult. And I know other people that have been out of job for long term, and you do go through the whole gamut of emotions, and it impacts on yourself, on your family, on your friends, on your relationships. It's a stressful experience. So, and the biggest takeaways that I've sort of taken away from that is to make sure that you've got a fallback position. You've got a wide range of skill sets. You've got a plan B, and that you also understand that it's a business. And it may not be anything related to you or your performance or anything like that. It might just be somebody's perception that they need to go in a different direction. Or or somebody else, or somebody else's issue completely. It might not be anything to do with you. It's just their issue. So it's I think you've got to be honest enough with yourself to be able to sit there and look in the mirror and ask and answer some really tough questions. But by the same token, you probably have to be aware that you can't. It's like athletes. You can't define yourself by your job. You can't define yourself by your sport. And that's been an important take home for me. So
naive question, but why was Rio in that state? Do you think it was a deliberate ploy, or what was going on there?
We in our building we faced sabotage by employees or workers that hadn't been paid.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Far out.
So, it got to the stage where there was a mad rush to get everything finished. The people the workers who they had coming into the site to do all of the jobs, many of them had been displaced from that entire site, from that very site, because of the need to build a new Olympic village, and they'd been relocated to favelas elsewhere. So they were busing in for 2 hours of the morning and then busing in for 2 hours out for 2 hours of an evening just to get to work and back. And so we were finding concrete in pipes. We were finding rolled up socks. Concrete had been poured down shower recesses and left to set. And so there was a whole bunch of things. And thankfully the next Olympics in Tokyo, I didn't want to go. I wasn't originally planning to go or supposed to go, but I found myself in a position where the coach asked me if I wanted to, if I could play a role for him. And in hindsight, I'm really glad that I did go, because I had a really positive experience out of it, and as such, I'm looking at it through slightly different lenses now, which has been really, really good for me.
Yeah, it can only go up from that first one.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
I gotta say, London was sensational, and I suppose that's the difference, right? So I went to London to support the Dutch team. I was in Sochi for the Winter Olympics, and though both very different Olympics, but they were great experiences. And I suppose that was that contrast to Rio being so shocking, that kind of fed that whole experience being a more negative one. But going to Tokyo, they did it. And even though it was during COVID, the Japanese did such a brilliant job. It was phenomenal, the work that they did there. And I felt sorry for them that they weren't able to experience that Olympic environment with 100% spectators and all of everything that comes with an Olympics, because it's a brilliant atmosphere to be a part of. It really is. So
yeah, I can imagine. And going into for some practitioners that might know someone who's lost their role? You mentioned the difference between, people that have got your back and colleagues.
Yeah.
What would be some great ways to show support for colleagues that are going through losing a job? It might not be there on their own fault. It might just be like circumstances like you mentioned.
Yeah.
But what are some good ways to help out, do
Yeah.
you think?
Look, just to check in every now and then, is sometimes all it takes, because you never know what that person is going through, and sometimes all it takes is just a chat, just to hear how they're going, or lend a shoulder to lean on, or that sort of thing. It's pretty simple, to be honest. Just ask them if they want to catch up for a coffee, that sort of stuff, if they're around and they can make it. End of the day, everyone still has to move on with their own lives, and everyone has their jobs to do and all of that sort of stuff. But it doesn't stop you from caring from the other people that you work with, and I would say that just being there for them, and having a regular catch up, or keeping an ear out for other positions that might be coming up and flicking them on, and that sort of stuff. I think that's a pretty good way just to start it off there. But
absolutely.
Again, mate, probably it can be driven a little bit by the person who's going through it. As well.
Everyone responds differently to that phase.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
And moving into the sort of personal side, mate, of the podcast, so we're getting close to wrapping it up. But you're a quotes man. You've mentioned a couple of quotes throughout the interview. What's your favourite one, if you have one, or it could be a life motto?
Oh, look, I don't have any. I don't have one favourite one. I do kind of like that the quote, hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. That one. And I love that insight from Michael Jordan, where he talks about missing, was it 9,000 shots or something like that, and taking the game-winning shot and missing, and failing over and over again, and that's why he succeeds. Because that's, I think there's some, there's a big lesson in that for a lot of us. It's not about how often you fail. It's about the measure of a person is about whether or not they're prepared to get up and have another crack at it. How bold they are, how courageous they are, how willing they are to be open and vulnerable, and all of that sort of thing. It speaks more about the character of a person than how successful they are.
Absolutely.
So that's I suppose that's where I kind of gravitate to, those sorts of thoughts and philosophies and quotes.
Yeah, no, it's definitely been a standout for me, as I've noticed it, that leap of faith that draws back onto that, taking that risk, whether it be in your career. Similar themes, which is good. What about in your work life? Do you have pet peeves? Anything that fires you up?
Look, for me, and what I've recognised in myself, like I hate it when if there's conflict, or things that are occurring where I suppose my own values are being challenged. Things like integrity and respect, and holding to certain standards, being upfront and honest in your communication with others, and that sort of thing, and having each other's back when things get hard. So it's just about, like, for me, that's where I know that I suppose I'm challenged the most. But what I also realised is, and I suppose this was clarified for me pretty recently, actually. It's I also have to understand that other people don't have those same values, so they might not have the same standards. So if there's a conflict there between the two, sometimes I just have to actually reconcile it and go, mate, that's a you problem. That's not on me. So and that kind of, for me, it probably de-escalates that conflict a little bit. But I think just having that knowledge that you've got the support from the other people around you that have impact in your daily workspace. So the same message is going to the athletes over and over again, and it's not being sort of undermined by words or actions and that sort of thing by the other people around you. There's nothing more damaging in a working relationship than that sort of behaviour, I think. So that'd probably be my biggest one. Yeah.
Yep. And what about on your day off? What's your favourite way to spend a day off when you get one anyway?
Yeah, when we get them. No, look, I probably get more at the moment than I have in the past, which has been brilliant. Look, I love going camping. I love heading up to Tiwa and Stradbroke Island and that sort of thing every so often, and just disconnecting, just getting away from it, not having the phone buzzing and all of that sort of thing. Enjoy playing a bit of baseball and all of that sort of stuff. Spend time with the family, just those sorts of things. Have a cheeky Sunday session with my mates and that sort of thing. That's getting one of those in does the mind and the soul wonders.
Yep. Yeah, there's some good experiences there. Getting outside, connecting with mates, and having a good beer. You can't beat those experiences.
100%.
For sure. Well, thank you so much for jumping on and sharing with us. It's been over an hour, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it. No doubt the listeners have as well. For those that have tuned into the live chat, if you've tuned in halfway through, make sure to listen to the whole thing. It will live on our YouTube channel, and we'll release the podcast in the next couple of weeks. But what's on the horizon for you for the rest of 2022, mate? What are you excited about at the moment?
Yeah, just look, to be honest, just seeing where this new role goes. At the moment we're working really hard to try to get this new structure of the swimming hubs up and running.
Mm-hmm.
We've got 3 new hubs within Queensland: Brisbane, Gold Coast, Sunshine Coast, and we're in a really formative part of that process. The fact that we sort of hit the ground running at the first part of the year, and it was very much like a startup company, new lessons every day and all of that sort of thing, always different things happening and never stopping. I'm actually really looking forward to now having some opportunities to plan things out and to help guide our staff through the back end of the year and in the lead up to World Championships next year. So it's a pretty exciting time for us to be putting these things together, and hopefully in a couple of years' time in Paris we'll see the fruits of that bear out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, fingers crossed, mate. No doubt you guys will, and go Aussies. With the for those that want to follow up and ask any questions to get in contact, mate, is there a best place to get in contact with yourself?
Look, I'm shocking on social media. If I am on Twitter and I am on Instagram and that sort of stuff, I very rarely post, but I'm sure people can get a hold of me there. But otherwise, get in touch with me through the Queensland Academy of Sport at the moment, and that's probably the best place to do it. Sure I'm happy to share those the social media details with you there as well, mate.
Yeah, too easy. For those, no doubt, driving, listen to the podcast recording, I will add the links in the show notes so you can, when you park, you can find them there. But our next chat is with Ben Serple, the head strength and conditioning coach of the Geelong Cats. That'll be October 13th, so we've got a couple of weeks off, and I'll see you guys then. Thanks again, Scott. Really appreciate you coming on, mate.
Pleasure, Jack.